Hey guys, hello and welcome or welcome back to my channel. This is Kshitij, and on this channel we talk about robotics, research and academia. Today's video we're going to be talking all about research papers and how to effectively read them. Now you might be wondering why we are talking about how to read research papers. So here is the fact for you. If you're an early stage researcher, you might have already heard by now that you have to read a lot of papers. And if you didn't know this already, well, now you do. This is essentially where you find the ideas of what has been done and what you need to do. And in one of the previous videos, we talked about identifying the research gaps for which reading the papers is very crucial. If you've missed out that video, the link will be in the I button above. So now the million-dollar question is, why do you need to know how to read a paper? Well, the catch is the structure of a paper is more or less the same across disciplines. The sections that they follow are typically title, abstract, introduction, related works, methods, results and analysis, and conclusion and future works. But the point is, the way it is written is not the way it has to be read. Now, this might come to you as a shocker, but the problem is if you're an early stage researcher, you might end up spending 8 to 10 hours reading just one paper. And by the end of it, you would start to freak out because if you average out 10 hours for one paper and you're told that you have to read thousands of papers, do the math. That would take you forever to finish the literature review itself before you can progress with your research. It's not just Amazon and YouTube that keep recommending you the next video or the next product that you to look out for that is more relevant to you. The same happens while reading a research paper. The problem is, while writing research papers, authors have page limitations oftentimes, and a lot of knowledge is assumed, so the background knowledge, right? So they will never give you like a full walkthrough or a lecture of the background knowledge you need to understand the paper. And this presumed knowledge is where most of the early stage researchers get stuck in a cycle. So they start reading the paper exactly the way it is written in full depth. So they read word to word, exactly trying to understand and digest everything. And then they stumble upon some concepts, some keywords, or some aspects, some equations, which they don't understand because it comes from presumed knowledge. Then they start doing a deep dive already at this stage without even knowing whether or not this paper is relevant for them. And that leads to a lot of time wastage and quick burnout. So in today's video, we're going to be talking about the strategy that I follow for effectively screening through a lot of papers in a lot less time. So let me set up the screen sharing quickly. So in front of you, you see my three-step pyramid scheme that I follow for screening the papers. So stage number one, I call it pre-screen. Now, whatever keywords you use for finding the papers in that domain, it's very likely that you're going to find a whole mix of papers, which means some papers might be using the application which you're interested in, while others might be using it for some other aspects. So for instance, back when I was doing a PhD, I was trying to learn all about Gaussian processes and what they could be used for. As a general purpose Bayesian method, they could be used for both classification and regression, but I was only interested in regression approaches. So when I was looking for papers on Gaussian process, I got a whole bunch of results and I had to stick to only the ones that use for Gaussian process for regression. Something like this is what you need to do for pre-screening. And how do you do that? So whenever you search for the keyword that you're interested in, you find a paper, you start looking at the title. Now, the title is something that has essential keywords, which tells you what was the application, what was the novel contribution, and what was the method used. Typically, in a different sort of combination of keywords, you'll get these things as a very high-level overview. So title is very important for you. But like I said, sometimes people may or may not clearly explain whether they're using a particular method for the application you're interested in or not. So next, you move on to the abstract. Abstract basically gives you a quick overview of the motivation of why this work was needed and where it is applicable. Also, it states the enhancements over the state of the art. So what was the trend before this contribution that you're reading and how this contribution enhances the existing body of work. It also adds as a final line some recent results that they have found as a part of the study, and then that helps you evaluate whether or not this paper is relevant to you and why you should care about it. Another thing that I ask my students to always look for is the first figure of the manuscript. So as an early stage researcher, sometimes you may not be able to understand the technical figures like the graphs and trends, but you would likely be able to understand the very first figure that appears in the introduction. Now in the machine learning domain, I know that the graphs and trends already start appearing in the first figure already, but for the other domains, typically the first figure is more like a visual abstract. So it's a high level description of the paper. So if you look at the title, the abstract, and the figure one is as like a triangle of understanding the paper, you'd be able to understand whether or not the application, the method is aligned with the interest that you're looking for. So that's a pre-screening stage where you look for a broad keyword, you end up finding a lot of papers, and in like 5 to 10 minutes, you filter out whether or not this paper qualifies for the domain you're interested in or not. That's stage number one. Moving on to stage number two is I call the method stage. Now in stage number one, you did a very quick glance. That's why I have this image of a sprinter here. So you are sprinting through the papers in 5 to 10 minutes. You have to make a decision whether or not this qualifies for your interest or not. Now of the papers that you have found are qualified, you have to look for what was the method used and what was the enhancements. Now by this I mean sometimes people use the original method to show a different application of the method. Sometimes people work on the original method to fill some limitations of that method and then explain what was the contribution and how it led to enhancements. So going back to the Gaussian process example that I was talking about, Gaussian processes are a problem of high memory complexity. So there are people who are trying to come up with solving it big data problems or parallelly handling large data sets and so on. Whereas there are also people who are trying to investigate whether it can be used for regression, for classification, and then several applications under them, right? So you have to understand what was the method that was used, and was it the actual original method, or was it an enhanced version of the original method? And if so, that was an enhancement. What was the enhancement over the original method? And if you don't even know the original method at this stage, this is where you do a study of the original method first, before doing anything else. Okay. So by this stage, you have done the pre-screening and you have kind of done a quick sorting of the papers that are relevant to you. Then you have done the method screening, which means you have understood what original method or an enhanced version of the method is being used by each of these papers. Now the last and final step. So at this stage, you went from sprinting to walking. Now you sit down, which means deep dive. This is where you start going through the paper from start to finish. Not before that. Because at this point, you want to be able to cluster the papers based on methods, based on contributions, and pick the papers against each other to try and understand, okay, what was the limitation of this work? If I use this method instead, would that limitation be solved? If not, why not? And so on and so forth. So now you're critiquing the methods. You're also looking at the conclusion section to understand what was the main contributions of this work and what were the limitations left for future works. And what is it that you can do to contribute to those? This is how you identify the research gaps in a 3-step pyramidal framework, the one that I follow. Don't try to invert this pyramid. This is not a novel you're reading where you have to go chapter by chapter because this chapter builds on the previous one. And if you jump a few chapters, you'll miss out on what's happening. Or if you read the conclusion first, it's a spoiler. This is not how it works. Now, I'll leave you with the cliffhanger here. So if the way the paper is written, so there's a title, there's an abstract, introduction, related work, and the following sections after that. If the way the paper is written is not the way it is supposed to be read, why is it written that way in the first place? This is something I leave for you guys to think. And if you have an answer, or if you think you do have an answer, comment down below and let me know what you think. Why is that the case? Let me know if you found this video useful. Be sure to like and share this video with other fellow researchers so they can take the benefit of this as well. Be sure to subscribe to my channel so that you get notified as and when the next video goes live. I make a lot of videos to help out the early stage researchers, and I do hope you take the benefit of that as well. Thank you and have a nice day.